episode of Joy Recovery Radio. Glad to be joined by my beautiful wife. Thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
So we're going to talk about resentment today. And we're going to start off with a framework that we put together that we feel like illustrates what does genuine recovery look like. And all of these elements have to be addressed. And we call this framework S for shame, A, B, C, D. And it's just an easy way for us to remember the 5 elements that have got to be addressed when we deal with recovery. The very first thing you're going to notice is the core or the center of this entire framework is shame. Shame predates the addiction. If Dr. Carnes is correct that the whole cycle of addiction begins with a shame-based belief system, that it is the primary driver. And when you look at this graph of these overlapping circles, shame is driving and influencing everything in this shame system. So we call it a system because it is a way of thinking and a way of living that is saturated in shame. And shame is touching these other 4 parts. The part that you'll see above shame is addiction. And shame drove addictive behavior. That's the A, is addictive behavior. B is bitterness, or what we're going to talk about today, resentment. C is control or abuse. And then D is deceptive beliefs. When you put all those together, they all overlap with each other. They all influence each other, and they all create a system of living and thinking. And so what some do in recovery is they will focus on getting rid of the addictive behavior, but they haven't dealt with the shame and they haven't dealt with the resentment. And they're still abusing their partner through what's called IAD behaviors. And if you want more about that, go to manwalamodel.com and you can find out more about those specific abusive behaviors. And then the D is distorted beliefs. And so it's not enough to just be quote unquote sober sexually. But if you're not dealing with the entire system that led to the addiction, you're more likely to go back to the addictive behavior, but you're also going to continue to live in shame, which is no way to live. That shame is going to be expressed in the way you believe, in your resentments, and in the way you treat your partner. Now, when those major 4 elements that are centered around shame interact and overlap with each other, you get 4 more secondary elements. And those elements are when addiction is overlapped with resentment, you've got what we call eroticized anger. When resentment is interacting with control or abuse, you have manipulation. When control is overlapping with the distorted beliefs, you've got deception. And when the distorted beliefs are overlapping with the addictive behavior, you have this sense of entitlement. So shame is really driving not just 4 elements, but an additional 4 secondary elements. So 8 things that the addict really needs to address if they're going to be in genuine recovery. Like we said before, recovery is not a set of tasks. It's a way of living.
Right.
And so what you want to do is move away from these elements towards a new way of living. So you move from shame to self-acceptance. You move from addiction to emotional regulation. You move from resentment to forgiveness. We're going to talk about that today. You move from control to equality in the relationship. You move from distorted beliefs to a renewed mind. You move from eroticized anger to empathy towards your partner. You move from manipulation to service towards your partner. Deception to living an integrated life where there's no more secrets. You're living a life of integrity. And finally, you're moving from entitlement to true humility. You see your place in the world. And all of these are a healthy, productive, intimate way of living. But if all you focus on is getting rid of the acting out behavior, you're not dealing with the shame and the other 7 behaviors that are driven by it. So that's what we do when we work with our clients is we work on all of these elements. And eventually we're going to do a podcast on each of these elements. But today we're focusing on resentment. So babe, what's your concept or definition or understanding of resentment from your perspective?
Well, first of all, I'm smiling because I had a lot of these written on my whiteboard in my office. And so it's just funny how we think so much.
We think alike.
Or
yeah.
You took my
I stole from you. Yeah. Most of my best ideas are from you. Truth.
Okay. Well, I'll take that. But I love how you geek out on stuff too.
I do geek out.
Yeah, you do. When we're thinking about resentment, an easy definition is harboring negative feelings and emotions about a person who I feel did wrong to me.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to put it. When you look at how do we get that word in the first place, it's always fascinating to me. How did we get the English words that we have today? And when you look at the origin of resentment, it's a French word. Not sure how to pronounce it. I think it's resenter or something like that. But what it literally means is to re-feel or to re-experience. And so it captures this idea that resentment is something that you ruminate on. It's something that you refill and you really re-experience over and over and over again. And it kind of perpetuates itself and it kind of feeds itself. There's this sense that some kind of injustice, some kind of wrong was done to me. And I don't want to let it go because then I'm letting him off the hook. I kind of want to hold on to it because this was wrong. And part of me taking a stance against this is holding on to it.
Mm-hmm.
So you tend to ruminate and it tends to get stuck inside of you. And it's hard to let it go. So when it comes to resentment, it's different from frustration. It's stronger than frustration. In fact, resentment is a blend of not just frustration, but often 5 other emotions. So it's very complex. It's very multi-layered. And because resentment is complex, you can't always identify the source. Yes, it has an element of frustration to it, but there is anger, there is a sense of bitterness, there is disgust, there is disapproval, there's disappointment. And all of these are kind of blending together to build that one state of mind, is what I would call resentment. It's a state of mind where someone has wronged us and there's an element of unforgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to let this go because I feel like justice hasn't been served if I let
Mm-hmm.
them go.
Holidays are often big triggers for resentment, I feel. And I also just think that when we think about resentment, an area that often feels tainted is anniversaries, holidays, birthdays. We just had Valentine's Day. And the association is you weren't with me on those days. You didn't show up for me on those days. Those days are tainted because you were unfaithful or you betrayed me. You put someone before me on days that were meant to celebrate our relationship. And that can harbor so much resentment and anguish. And moving forward, even after discovery, D-Day, it is really hard to self-regulate when there is an anniversary or a birthday or a holiday that comes up, because all of those feelings resurface again and again and again. And while we tell ourselves, I forgive him, but I don't forget, it's the not forgetting that really gets us to our core.
Yeah. And I think that's really getting to the heart of what the word means, and that is re-experiencing. So
Right.
the betrayed partner, like, you could forgive me for the deception
Mm-hmm.
and the betrayal, but then the anniversary of D-Day comes again.
Mm-hmm.
And those feelings, those experiences, they're coming back, they're surfacing again.
Resurfacing.
They're recycling. And you're having to choose to forgive me all over again, or hold on to this resentment that has surfaced again. So it's not like a one and done type thing. Those opportunities for resentment are going to keep presenting themselves. And you can ruminate
Right.
about it and go back there. And there's times on the calendar that will take you back there.
Of course.
Against your will. You have no choice.
Right.
But the choice is, do I ruminate on this? Do I hold on to bitterness and resentment? Or do I choose to forgive again? Because here it is, once again, forced by a time of year.
Well, we can choose. We can become bitter or we can become better. There have been a lot of ways that I have found gratitude, and I'm becoming better. I'm more self-regulated. I have better understanding of boundaries and how to apply those boundaries. I'm a better communicator. I don't bottle my emotions up the way that I used to. I am so grateful for the community that we have in our life and
The
the
recovery
way,
community.
yeah, and the way that we have put our relationship as the forefront of really everything. It's really the way that we have prioritized our marriage is something I'm so grateful for. And I don't know that we would have gotten here if I didn't choose better over bitter and really let go of some resentments that I had been harboring.
Okay. So, for example, recently we had a loved one that we perceived did a wrong, and they did a wrong towards me. And our reaction to it was very different. Why don't you talk about how it impacted you?
It's easy for me to go into resentment. But one of the things that I've realized is I'm really good about navigating my resentments as long as I have an opportunity to speak how someone's actions or behavior or words impacted me. And we're very transparent about our life. And this is a story that just happened recently where I felt there was unjust and I felt like something actionable needed to happen. What occurred wasn't necessarily an action that this person did to me. It was something that they did to Roy. But in my mind, I kept replaying this, what you permit, you promote. And I really try to live my life. If I permit you to do X, Y, and Z to me, then I am promoting that behavior to continue. And I don't want that. So we had a family member that did something that was really painful. And I watched how it impacted Roy, and it broke my heart. And he has struggled so much with letting go and not harboring negative feelings or emotions towards someone. And he was not going to talk to this person about how their actions impacted him. And we were going to go on a trip. And I just told him, I don't think that I can go on this trip unless this is addressed. I don't know how to be fake or how to play, or I'm not good at being fake. I have a horrible poker face. And if someone's done something to hurt me or my family or my children, there's a way that we can have a conversation about that where it's not an abusive conversation. It doesn't turn vile, but it's just to appropriately express what you did impacted me in this way. And I know that was very hard for you to do.
Well, I think it illustrated because this trip was to go see this person
Right.
who had, in our perception, wronged me.
Right.
And you opened up and you said, I don't know that I can be around this person and just keep my mouth shut and not take a moral stance for what they did to you, which I completely respect. Our personality is different and it's not a right or wrong. It's just a different way of processing resentments and potential resentments. And after doing step 4 and letting go of my resentments and being uber sensitive to the power of resentments and how it fueled my addictive behavior, I am very cautious to let things go and to not hold bitterness or a grudge against someone, even if they have wronged me. But as we talked about it, I let Jacqueline know I am going to talk with this person and I will let them know the impact that they had on me. And then I'm going to let it go. I'm not going to lecture them. I'm not going to hold it against them. But if that moral stance is what you need, that someone needs to take a stand and just let this person know when you did this, this was the impact. And that helps you let go of resentment, then let me take care of that. Because people handle resentments in different ways. But I know me and I know most addicts, we can generate resentments like that. That neural pathway has been well traveled. And so we're like a resentment factory. We can generate resentments in no time at all for sometimes the slightest offense. So now I'm extra sensitive towards that.
One of the things that is hard for me to conceptualize is why do the men, the addicts, hold resentment towards the betrayed partner when in reality they're the victim?
We get that question a lot, and especially from betrayed partners. They can't grasp, wait a minute, he stepped out of the relationship. I stayed faithful. If anyone has a reason for valid resentment, it's me. He wronged me. And yet he still has resentment towards me. I know that that's hard to fathom, but there are a few reasons that I see why addicts still struggle with resentment. And let's just explore a few of those. So I think there's several factors involved with the men that I work with. And one could be that because resentments were such a big part of their addictive behavior, and maybe they didn't do a proper thorough step 4 to identify all their resentments and give it to their higher power, or just that neural pathway is so well grooved that they can basically serve as a factory of resentments, and they can easily throughout the day collect resentments towards people that they feel like have done them wrong. I can almost guarantee that if there is still abusive behavior happening towards the betrayed partner, there is resentment in the heart. It's almost a given. It's rare to find a guy who is still mistreating his partner and there's not some resentment distorting the way he sees his partner. Here's the thing about resentment. It's a state of mind. And one of the things it does to us is it convinces us that whoever the other is the enemy. They are not for me, they are against me. And how many betrayed partners have we heard say to their addict partner, I am not your enemy, but they keep treating her as if she is.
One of the things that I've noticed in our community and even with clients is there is a lot of validation that the sex addicts, the men, need. And it comes off as needy, but they think that the betrayed partner is the one who is needy because she has, different parameters to make the coupleships safe.
Yeah.
Do you think that the men are?
This is very nuanced. So I can just share a couple things that I've observed, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So there's one element for some of the men. If they were highly enmeshed with their mother, meaning that their mother wanted the son to meet a lot of their relational and emotional and intimate needs because the father was not in the picture or was distant. And there's this enmeshment goes on. The guy can grow up resenting his mother for needing him to meet her needs. And if he sees a resemblance of that in his partner, that old resentment is now projected. But another element is this, and this is just, I'm painting with really broad strokes here, but as a general rule, we addicts are very needy people. We are emotionally stunted. The age that our addiction began is also the age that our emotional development ended because we escaped our emotions by acting out. We sexualized our emotions. So emotionally, we are not mature. We have not developed. We're very highly sensitive people, needy people, and we look to our partner by and large to meet our needs. Here's the problem with that. during early recovery, especially during early recovery. She needs space. She needs safety. She needs some boundaries. You do not need to be going to her for your validation, for your sense of security, for your sense of significance, for your celebration and recognition of your recovery milestones and achievements and things like that. And listen, men, listen, your needs matter. You're worthy of having your needs met. And our needs are primarily met through attachments. So I encourage you to be validated, to be seen, to feel significant, to feel recognized, to be celebrated. But don't look to your primary attachment during this time where she needs to focus on her healing. You need to have a brotherhood, and you go to them for that. We celebrate with you the milestones, the sobriety, the chips, achievements that you've accomplished in your recovery, and we recognize you and we validate you and we make sure that you feel seen and significant. And all of these are basic core human needs. But we don't want to put those on our partner during early recovery.
There's a whole lot more of accolades and affirmations that are provided to the sex addicts versus the betrayed partners. And that's really unfair. But if we don't recognize you've made it 2 years without relapsing, or you've gone 90 days, if there's not acknowledgement behind that, it will brew resentment for some men.
Right.
And that just floors me, because it's like, you want me to acknowledge and validate things that you should have been doing all along. Like, being faithful is part of being in a coupleship. You should have been doing this all along. That's what I was doing. But now you want me to celebrate you because you're on the right path. It just doesn't feel right. And what we've seen with some of the clients is the men will say, well, she doesn't appreciate everything that I'm doing.
Don't look to her for that.
And I'm like,
don't put that on her.
Are we talking about things that you should have been doing all along? And so now you've turned a corner. You want acknowledgement and validation and recognition.
Yeah. Hey, I didn't cheat on you for 90 days. High five. Like, don't do that.
Yeah, that's not going to get a high five from me.
Don't do that to her. And there's some other reasons I've seen that addicts can be, these resentment factories, and we can just generate resentment so quickly. Sometimes we have these expectations of how things should be with our partner. And when they don't meet those expectations, we resent them for it. So sometimes it's needs that we have. And if they don't meet those needs, we resent them. Sometimes it's expectations. And many of our expectations are irrational. They're distorted. They're not realistic. Like the expectation that, okay, in your trauma response, you can have your whole trauma and everything, but I need you to be kind and gentle and respectful in the midst of your flooding. And some of us will have that expectation. And if you've got some intense emotions going on and you've got some resentment, valid resentment going on, and you've got some anger that you need to express, instead of being a safe container for it and owning that and allowing that, we put up this wall of resentment. How dare you disrespect me? How dare you raise your voice to me?
Those have been exact words in our coupleship at one point.
Yeah.
I can tell you, for betrayed partners, and especially for myself, when there are trickled truths, when I have to relive experiences, whenever there was for some a slip or a relapse, that can brew so much resentment. Because for me, it's, how can you continue to do this over and over and over when you know that this is just killing me?
Right.
And that's those negative emotions and feelings that we can harbor and hold on to. It can make us bitter. It really can.
I've got one more that kind of explains why some of the men have resentment. And it's a big one. It's a big one.
Okay.
So let me see if I can.
They're all big.
Yeah, but this one's probably the most common. It's projection. I don't know how else to put it. It's projection. I hate myself for some of the things that I do and some of the things that I've done. And out of that shame, which shame is just resentment towards myself. It's holding a grudge against myself. That's what shame is. It's resentment turned inwards. Out of my shame, I project that onto you. So shame has a way of making you highly sensitive, that there's all these buttons all over you that people tend to push to get this hyperreactivity from you. There's all this delicate tissue, all this stuff in our psyche that are core wounds. And if our partner touches it, we resent them for it. But they didn't wound us. They're just interacting with us. But they touched on a core wound that we have. And we project that resentment that we have towards ourselves onto them. Let me see if I can explain. A couple of months ago, I had a broken jaw tooth. And it was so painful. And it was over the weekend. We couldn't go to the dentist. And I couldn't move my pinky finger without feeling it in this tooth. So in a very real way, you could say that I was tooth-centered, because my whole existence became about this tooth. and every movement created pain in that area. And it was so overwhelming and all consuming that Jacqueline actually sterilized some tools, some pliers and tools, tweezers and stuff. And she actually pulled the fragments of this tooth out. And I felt so much better afterwards. And the pain was relieved. But during that weekend, until she helped me with the removal and the healing,
oh my gosh,
you could say I was tooth-centered. In a very real way, shame causes you to be not tooth-centered, but self-centered. Your sense of self is so wounded that you're like a walking button that anybody could just bump into accidentally and push. And now you project that resentment onto them. And it's really not about them. It's not valid resentment. So there's three main core wounds that shame gives us. It's either insignificance, incompetence, or impotence. What I mean by that is insignificant. I have this core wound from my childhood where I did not feel seen or heard or recognized or validated, that I was invisible, that I didn't matter, that I was rejected, that I wasn't enough, that I was inadequate. That's that core wound of insignificance. And if our partner does something that we perceive is a replay of that core wound, then we resent them for it, when really it's the shame that we're experiencing. The second I, the three I's of shame, there's insignificance. And number two, there is incompetence. If I was told that I couldn't do anything right, that I was a failure, that I would never amount to anything, that I was incompetent in some particular area, which that's one of my core wounds, is I faced a lot of abuse around home improvement projects growing up. And so the result of that was I felt incompetent and almost paralyzed anytime there's any kind of home project that needs to be done around the house, because there's some shame, there's some core wounding there. And one of the times that I projected resentment onto you is when I took on a very small project of hanging up all of these frames on a wall that we wanted to do. And I measured, and I was very methodical with it. And I was so excited to surprise Jacqueline with it. And I was so resentful towards you when you decided, thank you, this is such a nice surprise, I love it, but I think I'd rather have this layout. And you redid it. And I just went into this shame spiral and was so in it. You did nothing wrong.
No, I didn't.
And there was no ill intent. You just wanted the frames to be a certain way on the wall. And your way was better once I saw the finished product. But the point is, a lot of the resentment that addicts feel is self-loathing that we transfer. It's when our partners touch on one of those core wounds that we have, and then we take it out on them. The third I is impotence. And what that simply means is there was some point in our life where we felt like we didn't have a choice. We didn't have control. We didn't have a sense of agency where we could affect change. And we felt powerless. And so a lot of guys, when they have to get rid of a smartphone, or they have to have a camera on them, or they have to have a GPS tracker or net nanny on their devices, and they feel like their freedoms are being restricted, it can tap into this shame response because it's tapping into a core wound from their childhood where they felt this powerlessness. And now in this warped dynamic, the betrayed partner is the parent and the addict is the child, and she's taking away my power, my freedom. And it reopens an old wound that he has from the past, and he resents her for it. Does that make sense?
Of course it makes sense. You know, one of the things that I think is helpful when we suspect that someone is harboring resentment, or that they're going into shame, or there can be negative emotions and feelings attached to something that was very benign, like there was no malicious intent, is just to pause and ask that person, what are you telling yourself right now? What story are you telling yourself? And if you do some self-analyzing and reflection, the story that you're telling yourself is, she doesn't think that I can do anything great. She thinks that she can do a better job. She doesn't appreciate anything that I do. I just spent all this time and nothing is good enough for her. And those feed resentment. Right. That is like the perfect concoction for resentment. That's why I have to take a pause and say, what story are you telling yourself right now?
Because there was a previous attachment in my life that said those things to me, or I perceived they did. And that's where the core wounding came. And now I'm perceiving that you're echoing the same.
Right.
A new attachment is saying the same thing. I relive it, I reopen, and I transfer that to you. I project that onto you, and it has nothing to do with you. And that is the addict story. That's where a lot of our resentments come from.
So betrayed partners, obviously, we also experience resentment, and it can be in a way of what story are we telling ourselves, but it can also be a reflection of repeated actions. So if our partner is abusive and constantly abusive, that is going to create resentment. It's an understanding of, he knows what this does to me. But he chooses to continue to do that over and over and over. That is some deep rooted resentment. And I felt that really early, especially when I would feel like I had to pause and step away from providing myself safety in order to fix a shame spiral that you were in, or to chase after you because you were stonewalling me. And reflecting back, boy, did that create resentment. As a betrayed partner, one of the things that we can do when we feel resentments bubbling up is apply boundaries to keep ourselves safe. Forgiveness does not mean that we're tolerating behavior. It simply means that we are not associating ourselves to someone else's actions or their inability to provide safety for us. I'm forgiving this. Moving forward, I'm not going to be held hostage to your behaviors, but I am going to put some really deep parameters and boundaries in place to protect myself. And when we start doing that, then we can relinquish some of the resentment that we had because we're no longer tied to them. We're no longer a hostage. We're freeing ourselves.
Yeah. And what I would share with the betrayed partners is you probably have some people in your life who mean well, but they tell you very early on after D-Day that you need to forgive. And what I would say to you is don't even think about that in the early days. You'll get to that later. You should be angry, righteous anger. God's angry. This was unjust. This was wrong. And the reason you feel angry is because you still care. If you did not care, you wouldn't be angry. What I would encourage you to do is harness that anger, leverage that anger to take action. Feel that anger. Let it flow over you. Don't be so quick to forgive, but leverage that anger to take action, to provide safety, to build boundaries, to do what you need to do to take care of yourself first. You're going to get to forgiveness down the road, and you do want to eventually get to forgiveness. If you don't, it's going to harm you. The actions of the past are going to continue to harm you today if you hold on to unforgiveness. So forgiveness is a gift that you actually give to yourself. You extend it to that person, but you give it to yourself. And the forgiveness that you'll eventually give towards your partner does not mean reconciliation. Those are not the same things. It doesn't mean that you trust them. Those are not the same things. It doesn't mean that you're letting them off the hook. It doesn't mean that you're condoning what they did.
Or tolerating or accepting the behaviors.
What it does mean is this. I am going to let go of the right to hurt you for hurting me. That's forgiveness. I turn you over to God, who is a just judge, and I'm going to let him evoke justice. Initially, when you feel resentment, you want to hurt the person who hurt you.
Yeah, we want them to feel pain.
And that's a natural inclination. You know that you've forgiven this person when you let go of that inclination, when you let go of that right, that what you did to me was wrong. And I feel this temptation to hurt you for hurting me. But I forgive you. And the way I forgive you is I'm going to let go of that right to hurt you, to hold that against you, to relive it over and over and over again. And here's what it means. You forgive them today, but that resentment, re-feeling, re-experiencing, it's going to show up again. And you have to choose to forgive them again and again. It's not a one and done. It's going to be a process, and it's going to be a journey, and it's a difficult journey. But initially, in the early days, don't even think about forgiveness. Hold on to that righteous anger and use it. Use it for action. Now, we men, we have got to move from resentment towards ourselves and others to forgiveness. If we haven't dealt with our shame, we're going to have a very hard time letting go of our resentment towards others, because so much of it is a projection of the resentment we feel towards ourselves. So in working with the healthy attachments in our brotherhood, in working with a healthy attachment with our higher power, we're able to let go of that shame. We're able to practice self-forgiveness, and now we're able to forgive others.
When we harbor and linger and hold on to resentments, we're giving our power away, ladies. Keep your power, turn your pain into purpose. I love step 12, where the goal is to give back, to serve in the community. And I really think that that is one of the best ways that we can flip those resentments into purpose and power to help a sister in need. Lastly, we want to touch on gratitude. So there was a philosopher, I love his name, Robert Roberts.
Is that the best his parents can do?
It's easy enough.
Roy's.
One thing that he found is resentment and gratitude cannot coincide. They cannot live in the same space. Gratitude will always trump resentment.
That's the power of gratitude. It is one of the most powerful emotions, and two powerful negative emotions cannot coexist at the same time in the same space inside of a person when there's gratitude, and that's shame and resentment. And you think about how big those two drivers are in our addiction and our abusive behavior, and you eliminate both, in the moment when you practice gratitude. So one of the things that I practice as a daily discipline every morning is not only do we pray together, but I speak gratitude over you. And I actually say it out loud.
Yeah, you do.
And often I will be touching you in some way. And what are some of the gratitudes that I typically share with you?
Man, thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you for loving me unconditionally and showing me what unconditional love really looks like.
Yeah. I'm so honored and privileged to be your husband. But this is my favorite role out of all the roles I've ever had. And that does a couple of things. Number one, it's very affirming, I imagine, for you. And it builds up your confidence in our coupleship and makes you feel loved, validated, seen, acknowledged, appreciated, cherished, celebrated, those kind of things. But it also does something for me. It's like a booster shot. It's like an inoculation from my heart to make sure I do not go into resentment towards my beloved today. That if I practice gratitude, if I remind myself of the things that I admire and appreciate and love about you, then that keeps resentment far away from me. Because here's the thing, resentment and gratitude are on a spectrum. And one way to look at it is this. Every step I move away from gratitude, I'm moving towards resentment. And so when we practice gratitude as a way of life, as a state of mind, we're actually ensuring that we don't go into resentment over the normal frustrations of life. That my heart, which used to be a resentment factory, is inoculated from that resentment if I practice gratitude.
And I'm so grateful that you do that. It is really hard for me to have resentment towards you when you make a pledge like that in the morning.
One of the things that we've both noticed with the men and the women that we work with, we've seen it on both sides, is that there are times when the heart is so full of resentment that even when we press them and challenge them, they cannot bring themselves to say some kind of positive or grateful thing about their partner. And that's an indication of how resentment can take a hold of your heart so deeply that it's a state of mind and you can't let yourself go to that other side and even think a positive or grateful thought, because now you're in full-blown enemy mode. You see them as the enemy and you want them to suffer for what they've done. And we've seen that. And those couples, they don't have a really good chance of making it. So in summary, what we've talked about today when it comes to resentment is that it is a multi-layered, complex blend of emotions. But what it seems to have in common is a perceived wrong or injustice that was done towards me. And so I re-feel it, I re-experience it. There is this element of unforgiveness because I want to take a moral stance. I don't want to let you off the hook. I want you to pay for what you've done. That's resentment. And why in the world would the betrayer feel resentment towards the betrayed? It should be the other way around. But we've looked at the fact that projecting, shame, very needy, very emotionally stunted, a lot of distorted beliefs going on, a lot of expectations that aren't rational, and just the fact that our resentments predated the addiction and fueled the addiction. And there's this neural pathway that we can so quickly travel down, leading towards resentment. And we talked about the two remedies that are the best way to overcome resentment. That is entering into forgiveness and practicing gratitude.
And also, as a precaution, is just pause and ask, what are you telling yourself right now? Are you telling yourself a story that isn't true, that paints me in a negative picture? Because the truth is I love you and I'm still here and I'm fighting for this relationship. And I've proven that. The truth is I love you unconditionally. The truth is I am trying to protect our coupleship. The truth is I want to have a future with you. The truth is you are telling yourself something that I do not believe or that I do not feel about you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode today. And we encourage you to either like or subscribe if you're listening on YouTube or you're listening on Apple Podcast. We believe in this content. We want to help as many couples as we can. And the more you promote it and share it, the more people are going to hear about it. And if you don't, we might resent you for it.
Not true.
Thanks for joining us.
Choose joy.